Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders, viewable on MOP and IMTV and YouTube. Today, we're chatting with the leadership of Fresh Lines for Youth, or FLY. Our special guests are Artavia B, President and CEO, Kassa, Belay, Vice President of Programs and Impact, and Co-Chair of the Board, Meera Chary. And thank you all so much for joining us. And this is my very favorite topic, right? It's young people. And how do you ensure that people get to actually have the life that they're meant to live, that they're able to contribute, that they're happy? Artavia, just sort of start us off. You've led a whole bunch of different organizations. We recruited you to some of them. Talk a little bit about how you see FLY fitting within the ecosystem of services for youth.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be here. Thank you for having us on your show. Fresh Lifelines for Youth is a really critical part of the ecosystem here in the Bay Area and down the line beyond the Bay Area. As you know, the economic situation here in the Bay is difficult. There's a lot of folks who are struggling to make ends meet, and it's not the easiest place to raise a family or have an apartment or a home. And so we see a lot of families where maybe their parents are working multiple jobs, or perhaps other caretakers are looking out for young people. And with the defunding of many critical services in our community, our youth don't have a lot of great options outside of school. And oftentimes, even inside of school, we see certain demographics of young people targeted or exited out quickly for fairly normative teenage behavior. And that's where our work comes in, to partner in the community and schools, and also to work with system-involved young people to make sure that they're not being punished for normal mistakes and errors, but they have the support, mentorship, and opportunities to make their mistakes, just like everyone else made their mistakes, and also recover and have someone who cares about them walk them through whatever that recovery might look like. So I'm really proud to be at the helm of the organization. We were founded back in 2000 and really targeting, again, juvenile justice involved young people, specifically with mentoring, education, leadership opportunities, and some legal training so they can understand, the ramifications of some of the choices they may have to make. One neat thing about us is we also go all the way through. We're working with youth who are in the juvenile hall. So we're there talking with them about all those same things and supporting them when they exit the system, making sure they have the resources, mentorship, and support they need to not go back, to not make the same mistakes.
I find this to be so interesting because, you don't know this about me, Artavia, although we've worked together. So my family, through multiple generations, everybody worked. Everybody still works, right? We had none of this, father and mother having separate things. Now, we were a two-family working household, and that goes back generations. We've also had some people, including moi, who have acted out at times. We had a lot of advantages. Kassa, when you are dealing with kids who don't have the advantages that I had, or that my children had, or that I had from my parents, how do you ensure that those kids are not affected for the rest of their lives because of some stupid mistake, like getting busted for marijuana because there was a misunderstanding of which state had which laws, or whatever, acting out in a class? How are you there? How do you show up for those young people?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and I appreciate the framing. I think there are sort of three pillars that we build our coaching and case management programs around, but these elements are present in all of the programs that we offer. The three pillars that we're really hyper-focused on are identifying intrinsic motivation. So understanding and then nurturing a young person's desire to grow by identifying what their passions are and where their budding interests are. We do have a formula that we know works. There are certain ways to work with young people that ensure that they're engaged and well respected. But we tailor the sort of individualized packaging of what we work on with them to what their interests are and what's going to build their sense of agency. And with all the young people we work with, we ensure that there's a set of sort of accountability principles so that they understand what their expectations are, and they're working with really clear benchmarks towards what those expectations are.
So, Meera, did you get involved because of the programmatic aspects of this that were very specific, or did you get involved just to do a good thing for young people? What was your motivation? As we're talking with Kassa about the intrinsic motivation of kids, what is your intrinsic motivation, those of your fellow board members to serve?
It's a great question. I mean, I think that one of the things that Kassa was sort of getting at through those pillars is the highly relational nature of Fly. There's the relationships that Fly thinks about with the young people. And then there's so many other relationships that Fly really prioritizes in terms of building with community members, et cetera. And that's really what drew me to Fly, was the people and the relationships. I had the opportunity to work with Artavia's predecessor, many years ago in more of the context of my day job. And in doing so, both became quite inspired by the work of Fly and the work that Kassa and Artavia started to describe with young people in the community, but also with the incredible intentionality and care with which Fly does the work. It's not just the what, but also the how. And so that really drew me to want to think about how I could become a part of this community. As a resident of the Bay Area and somebody who cares deeply about the place, working with an organization that's trying to do such good in a place that has, so many incredibly beautiful components, but also the challenges that Artavia mentioned as well, felt really important.
So when you're talking about these issues that young people face, there's a holistic aspect. Artavia, you and I talked about this, right? It's not just one thing. So you have the parents are part of this, the community is part of it, the young people are part of it, their older and younger siblings are part of it. How do you assure that you have a holistic approach, or do you leave that to other people and you just focus on, meeting the youth where they come?
Yeah, I think we're always going to center the young person that we're working with. The reality is they are the drivers and designers of their own future. We're not here to rescue anyone. We can't rescue anyone. The idea is to understand who they are, again, what they love, what they dream for their future, and to help them co-design a plan to get there. And, obviously that involves more than just the young person. It involves, whether it be the teachers or the family members as well. So there's certainly collaboration and partnership across the other grown-ups, responsible grown-ups that are looking out for our young people. I'd invite Kassa to delve more into this question.
Kassa, when you talk about your approach, how do you involve everyone while respecting the individuality of the young person?
What I would say is the very first thing that we're doing with young people that we work with is getting to know them and understanding what motivates them. And as we get to know them better and they talk about their own aspirations, we're able to identify and sort of draw links to other family members, friendship circles that they want to strengthen, or institutions in their lives, whether it's, around civic engagement for working with elderly people or doing community cleanups. In other words, there are opportunities to connect with a variety and array of different community resources that build this sense of belonging and sense of place where young people have often felt sort of eclipsed by fast-moving culture and society that they're a part of.
That's very interesting. So you think part of the solution is just doing stuff together?
100%.
Doing stuff together. That's really interesting. Are you basically building neighborhoods, Kassa?
I would say we're building communities because the neighborhood has like a physical connotation, and often we see young people connecting, whether it's virtually or in places that they don't live, but they're interested in getting to know. But that sense of community really transcends one specific place.
Now, when a young person needs to have refuge, sometimes they would need to have refuge from their parents. Right? Ask my kids, right? They need to have refuge from their schools. How do you balance this whole idea of connection, which requires people to actually talk with each other, but also respecting individuality as young people are trying to define themselves? They sometimes need space. Do you have different programs? Do you have different gatherings that provide those types of different platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think part of the core approach that we operate with is meeting young people where they're at and pushing them to reach the goals that might require a little bit of stretching and growing. So that may mean that we are driving down on where they are most comfortable and ensuring that they feel like they can deepen those connections, or it may be finding new relationships that they're interested in that bring them to new settings, whether it's around new jobs or college aspirations, trying to get into higher education opportunities.
Yeah, if I could add to that one, because we're talking about all the things that we're doing with our young people. And I just want to make sure that everyone also recognizes that sometimes that involves working with adults to see young people as valuable, to see their input as valuable. Sometimes there's a retraining of the adults, whether those are adults in the school setting, adults in the court system, adults in the juvenile justice halls. Oftentimes, adults are approaching young people with the mind of punishment instead of the mind of teaching, mentoring, growing, allowing them the cycle to fall down, get up, fall down, get up. And quite unfortunately, most adults don't get that. And so there is an aspect of retraining the adults in young people's lives to respond in a more developmentally appropriate way.
It's such a good point to make, Artavia. And one thing I would add that kind of builds on that is that we have this really special opportunity to also shape the way emerging adults, young adults who are going into new careers that would affect the lives of the young people that we work with are thinking of young people. And we do that with really direct application opportunities. So we recruit volunteers from higher education who get trained in our legal education curriculum and then actually join us in a series of workshops and classrooms with young people. And these are young folks who are thinking about becoming teachers, who are thinking about becoming lawyers. And so it's through a variety of different ways that we're changing the environments that young people live in, and doing so with a real focus on relationships.
I love what you're talking about, because every culture, every era has we have our own embedded views of what normative is. Right? The Victorian era, how the Victorians basically treated kids. Children should be seen and not heard, all that whole idea of not really being too caring, right? Have you all seen Mary Poppins, right?
Or even worse, that they're just mini adults, right?
Right, and every society, or every religious group, right, has their own normative views. How do we just change in a way that respects these traditions? I'd love to just go around the room, right? Meera, then Artavia and Kassa. How do we respect the traditions, yet respect the individual child who might be challenging in each of their different living circumstance, those traditions of their parents a little bit, right? How do you deal with that? Meera, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't want to respond certainly on, Fly's entire behalf, because I think that this is a it's a question that can be interpreted in different ways. But what I would say is at the core, it goes back to what I had mentioned in the first place, which is relationships. And if that core is, again, whether it's cultural differences or generational differences, really starting from a point of trying to understand what the starting point is, whether that's, from Artavia, as Artavia said, the adults that are working with young people or the young people themselves, really being curious about, well, what are those assumptions that are sort of undergirding the current, the sort of standards and actions of the existing systems. Only with that can we even think about shifting or changing them. And with that sort of understanding, that's how you build core empathy, right? Between the humans involved in the situation. And so I think that it really comes down to just like asking really good questions and being in relationship with one another.
Now, you also have specific areas where you provide training, for example, in the law, and in how societies actually organize themselves to set rules, listen to communities, but also sanction people who are basically conducting themselves in a way that hurts others. Leadership. Artavia, Kassa, Meera, could you just talk a little bit about some of those training elements that you provide to your young people and how you involve adults in those?
I think this really gets to our theory of change, right? What is the premise behind which we're operating our programs? And we see legal education as an opportunity to both demystify a system that is often confusing for young people and spark what we call a critical consciousness, where they are becoming upset by injustices that they learn about while practicing new relationship skills that help them better understand themselves and the people that they're around, and ultimately make better decisions with all of that new information. So we're sparking a sort of political awakening while growing social emotional skills, all in ways that contribute to the outcomes that we want to see around reduced criminal legal system involvement and a better educational attainment and social emotional skills. And I'll just anchor onto one part of your earlier question, Mark, and say that one of our really most fascinating and successful programs is called Stay Fly. And it's a play on the term transition age youth. So the TAY population is a group of young people who were perceived as fully functioning adults until the academia sort of coincided with practitioner experience and said, we know the brain science around impulse control and decision making is really different for this group of young people. And the way the courts interact with them and the way service providers meet them should reflect that new brain science. And so we have adjusted our legal education curriculum and the sort of social emotional skill building approach that we have to be tailored to an 18 to 25-year-old demographic in ways that say, you're not teenagers, but you're also not yet fully functioning adults and shouldn't be treated as such. And it just sparked for me, as you went back in time to the sort of Victorian era, to think about how they perceived about the young people then to how we're still evolving the way we understand young people now.
Also, it seems to me that what you're talking about is the equivalent of a number of different elements, right? The utility to young people of having rules and following them, right? Explaining how that system works so that they can get an appreciation for it, and the whole issue of creating mentorship so that you have a way to go to somebody else when you need help. Right? There's a lot here to continue to unpack, but since we only have a limited time, let's talk a little bit about how you measure your successes. Because in any business, including the business of serving youth, and let's face it, this is a business. You have income streams, you have expenses, you're hiring people, right, Artavia? You're paying salaries, you're trying to have impact. How do you measure the impact that you have? How do you know that the money that you are receiving is not just going into a black hole?
Yeah, I think to understand this, part of the understanding of how we measure is understanding exactly what we do. So there's the direct service that we do with young people. We have 7 or 8 core programs alongside 7 or 8 innovations where we're testing new ideas and new theories. All of those programs, all of those innovations are informed by young people. In fact, 25 years ago when we were founded, it was young people from the juvenile halls in Chicago that spoke to our founder about what they would need to not find themselves in that circumstance again. And so over time, we have continued to center youth voice, youth ideas. What do you need from us to be successful? So that's number one. And then separately from that, FLY has evolved to now include systems change work, which we measure a little bit differently. So I'll invite Kassa to respond to the work we do with our young people, and then I'll come back and talk to you about the advocacy and policy work we're doing.
Between you coming, Kassa's presentation and you coming back, Meera, I'd like you to comment on how the board sees what Kassa is going to tell us about how they evaluate, because at the end of the day, right, governance requires you to be assured that these programs are actually having impact. Kassa, go ahead.
Yeah, so important framing. I'll just say that each year we're serving upwards of 2,500 young people between 11 and 25 years old from across 5 different counties in the Bay Area. 90% of those young people are of color. And we are tracking 3 core metrics that let us know if we're meeting our objectives or not. That is around reducing recidivism. So we see that 90% over 90% of the young people that we work with do not sustain further justice system involvement once they've begun working with us.
Over 90%. So the recidivism rate is very high. It's about a third, isn't it?
The recidivism rate in California is actually at about 74%. And we are seeing that 90% of the young people that we work with do not recidivate. Wow. And then what I would go on to describe is that we're also ensuring that young people are setting and achieving educational goals. And those vary for the younger folks based on their personal experience. But 80% of the young people that we work with do achieve the educational goals that we set with them. And lastly, over 80% of young people demonstrate improved social emotional skills, which we think are really core to navigating systems because we know the importance of sustaining strong and positive relationships with the people around you.
So, Meera, when I heard Artavia describe the programs that are being given and also programs that are being tested, the implication of what Artavia said is that you've got kind of an incubator as well, where you're constantly testing new ideas, and some of those ideas will pass muster and receive investment. Some of them will be failed experiments, right? It happens with every organization. Are you looking at the numbers behind what Kassa has described and helping to evaluate from a board perspective where your funds are being well invested?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say, there's governance, as you're noting, which I think is, of course, a really important role of the board, but there's also just the core role of learning and adaptation and thinking about how that relates to strategy evolution, which is another, board stewardship role, but of course is a huge piece of what Artavia and Kassa and the rest of the FLY leadership team think about. So this idea of kind of experimentation is necessary in a set of systems which are really complicated, are intersectional, et cetera. So everything, the idea, and I think that, the idea of sort of results not being quote unquote what we want them to be is a learning opportunity. It's always an opportunity to say, what does this mean? What does this tell us about what we're learning from the young people, what we're learning about the system, what we're learning about the programs? So yes, I would say, a couple of tactical things is, as a board, we're in close relationship with the leadership team, understanding and reading dashboards and other sort of outcome metrics, but also importantly, really thinking about even like what is the outcomes framework as FLY thinks about this evolution. So as Artavia mentioned, Kassa mentioned some, of course, incredible numbers in terms of the impact with direct young people, but that understates the impact that FLY is having, especially as it relates to the systems change work. And of course, that sort of impact is much more complicated to measure. And that's not just for FLY, that is for the whole social sector. This isn't, you're right, there is sort of a business element of this, but this is not producing widgets, right? It is much more complicated to really understand the impact of passing or advocating for legislation that's going to have an impact on not just thousands, but tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. And that doesn't even count the sort of knock-on effects of other states that are looking to California, et cetera, et cetera. So there's so many sort of intangible and tangible impacts of the work. And I think that as the model evolves, especially to thinking more about systems change, there is continued work to be done around thinking about like, how do we really measure this and how do we tell the story of it? Both to inform what FLY is doing down the road, but also to really bring people into the conversation.
Profit at the end of the quarter is so simple compared to a young person's future, right, Artavia?
That's right. And, I just want to take a moment to say, while those numbers are impressive, the work we're doing is successful, not because of the environment we're working in, but in spite of it. I'm a firm believer that environment influences behavior. And so while we do really great work with our young people, the environment that we're asking them to come of age in is not ideal. And so the systems change work specific to our policy and advocacy work here in California is incredibly important. If we can create systems that are more compassionate, more human-centered, and that actually understands young people as growing and developing into who they will become versus being punitive-based. Imagine how much greater our success would be. Last year, we co-sponsored 3 bills that passed that makes the environment much more sustainable. This year, we're co-sponsoring 4 bills. We love to get to a point where our laws in the juvenile justice system properly reflect again, the developmental stage of our young people and come from a more productive, human-centered healing approach, restorative approach, so that it's safe to make mistakes and recover, and to not be so nuclear in our response with things like a 3-strike rule. Gosh, if I implemented that at home with my own kids, I wouldn't have kids. They would have been gone preteen. So, we really need to bring the humanity back into how our systems operate, whether those are school systems, the juvenile justice system. These are young folks. We should expect that they're going to make some bad choices, and we should have systems in place to restore them and give them the chance to come back and try again until we can launch them off into adulthood.
What you're basically saying is that we become where we pay attention. We're not paying attention to our kids if we neglect our kids, if we basically end up with binary choices where every mistake makes someone a discard. We're going to be within a country with a lot of discarded talent.
And market an overinvestment in the wrong things. We're overinvesting in policing. We're overinvesting in prisons, which, by the way, are for-profit, which creates a whole nother can of worms. We should be investing that money into job programs for young people, into the schools, into leadership programs. The fastest way to solve poverty is not by locking people up. It's by making sure people have access to the economy to exit poverty. But we haven't figured that out as a society yet. And so we continue to create an environment that's producing desperation in the populations that have the least.
Well, what you're saying is that people are more responsive to incentives than they are to punishment. That's what you're saying. If those incentives connect to what somebody defines as their intrinsic motivation, which is exactly how you started, then you've already got a basis for people to adjust their behavior. But if you just rely on punishment, then you're not going to. Yes, there are people who just need that kind of structure, but that's not all of us. And I think what you're doing is really important. It's really important to connect to people who want to change their communities. Artavia B, President and CEO of Fresh Lifelines for Youth, the FLY program, Kassa, Belay, Vice President of Programs and Impact, and Meera Chary, Co-Chair of the Board. Thank you so much for sharing all the work that you're doing. Please thank, most importantly, what I'm going to say? Your young people who the adults listen to and who are the collaborators in shaping what you do. From the very beginning, please thank your funders, your staff, all of the community members who are part of this. And Artavia, you're indicating I'm forgetting somebody. Who am I forgetting?
Well, I'm indicating that I want to make sure that my last point was well taken. It's not all about incentives. It's about creating environments where everyone can thrive. It's not just about incentive. It's about creating spaces where young people feel seen, where they feel loved, respected, and invested in. And that's not always about an incentive, Mark. Sometimes it's just about having someone there that cares about you, right? So that magical formula that I just outlined is why we're so successful. It's not because we're incentivizing the young people. It's because we're investing love and hope, support, creating an environment for them where they can actually become themselves safely and begin to thrive. So I just really wanted to make sure that came across in our time together.
I appreciate the correction. One of the things that I do very poorly sometimes is create enough space. So I hope we created enough space here for all the ideas, all the wonderful work that you have to be exposed. So thank you all. Thank you so much for your insights, and thank you for your wonderful work.